Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this session. I hope everyone's doing well today. I'm Louise Macdonald, National Director of the Institute of Directors in Scotland, and it's my privilege to be chairing this session this afternoon. As we're all joining, please do use the chat function to introduce yourself, say hello and where you're from. And also please tell us what you would be interested in getting out of this session, or anything in particular that you're really interested that we might explore in this session today. So please do just use the chat function. I'm sure everyone's familiar with that now after so long in these sorts of using this this technology. So please do just join in on there on the chat. So I'm sure this is going to be a really lively and thought-provoking discussion. So again, we're just really delighted that everyone has taken the time to join us. For those of you not aware, the Institute of Directors in Scotland is a membership organisation for directors in business and cross-sector organisations. And that includes chief executives, directors, board members, chairs, non-execs, and so on. And our aim is to build a community of directors who are focused on sort of purposeful business, thinking about their own development. We operate the Chartered Director in Scotland, as well as a whole range of membership activity and also policy activity. But for today, we're delighted to be working in partnership with the David Hume Institute and Black Professionals Scotland for this discussion. So some practicalities before we get things started. DHI, you will notice, is recording this session and it will be uploaded to the website afterwards. There's going to be about approximately 15 minutes of panel conversation before we move on to questions from yourselves. And for the questions, please do post them in the Q&A section. Again, the function's at the bottom of your screen, and we'll then invite you to unmute so that you can ask your question directly. And when you're asking your question, it would be great if you could just state your name and your applicable organisation as well. And if any issues unmuting, then do let us know. And near the end of the event, as we kind of approach that kind of magic hour, I might try and group questions just to try and get through as many as possible. So we'll see how we go with that. So let's get started then today to introduce our speakers for today's discussion. Are Scotland's business leaders missing a trick? And first of all, we're going to hear from Susan Murray with insights from the David Hume Institute's latest research on this topic. And Susan joined the Institute 2 years ago this month, in fact, and is a hugely experienced executive and non-executive director, and was a founding trustee of the ICAS Foundation, an organisation working hard to change the diversity of young people entering the finance profession. And Susan also served 5 years as a public appointee on the board of Nature Scot, formerly known as Scottish Natural Heritage. Susan will then be followed by Enoch Adeyemi, and Enoch is the founder and CEO of Black Professionals Scotland, a fast-growing organisation which supports members and corporate partners across the country. And he's built a wealth of knowledge in initiating, starting and growing new ventures in multiple countries. He founded Bagafa.com, an e-commerce platform, in 2021. And before that, in 2017, he co-founded Visit Nigeria Now, the premier domestic tourism platform in Nigeria. He also works as a consultant within the financial services industry and is a fellow of the ACCA. And after Enoch, we'll hear from Aidan O'Carroll, the current chair of the Institute of Directors here in Scotland, and a former senior partner at EY, where he advised both local and global companies across a wide spectrum of tax and business issues around the world. And in addition to his work with us at the IOD, Aidan has a number of non-executive director roles in organisations based in the UK. And in August of this year, Aidan became the chair of Revenue Scotland, where he will use his extensive experience and insights into global trends and their connections with the rapidly changing regulatory frameworks around the world. So a fantastic panel. So looking forward to what everyone has to say. And so I'm sure you'll all join me in welcoming Susan, Enoch and Aidan. And let's get started with these inputs. So Susan, first of all, can you tell us a bit more about the research that the Institute has carried out around this topic?
Certainly, thank you, Louise. I'm delighted to be here today alongside Enoch and Aidan to discuss this important subject. The David Hume Institute is a charity that was established in 1985 in Edinburgh with a mission to increase diversity of thought and undertake independent research and deliver thought-provoking events. Lucy, are you able to upload the slides for us? I'll talk a bit about what prompted the research. In 2015, the Institute undertook some research looking at the diversity of Scotland's top leaders. And then last year, we repeated that in 2020. And what we found was we looked at over 700 leaders across all different sectors last year. And we were really kind of taken aback when we saw the difference between the business sector and other sectors in Scotland. For the business sector last year, what we looked at was the top 25 companies, and we looked at the positions of chair and chief executive in those businesses. And we were really surprised at how starkly the business sample stood out from the leaders of other sectors. And this graph here just shows the one by gender. Then through the course of some other research we were doing called the Action Project, we spoke to some entrepreneurs, and there were some common themes coming out about limited access to capital and about some fixed attitudes of investors. And there were two were kind of coming together in our minds. And then earlier this year, we spoke to Professor Linda Scott, who wrote the book called The Double X Economy. And she was looking at the global picture, and data was just, the data was simply mind-blowing. And we were really kind of just thinking about how power and money come together, and we thought, right, we really need to look at a bigger sample for Scotland. So the top 25, maybe it's showing us something different, and maybe if we look at a bigger sample, we'll see that business is much the same as other sectors. So this year we took a larger sample. We looked at the top 50 businesses, and thanks to Louise and the IOD for helping us identify the top 50 businesses in Scotland. We looked at the top 40 investment companies, the top 25 family businesses, and the top 25 angel investment companies. Now, not every one of those organisations had both positions of chair and chief executive. So this is a sample of 223 leaders, chair, chief executive, or the equivalent in those organisations. And what we found was actually the results weren't very different to the smaller sample from 2020. It's 90% male and only 1% people of colour. Lucy, if you could go to the next slide, please. Just the one, that's it. And the difference across the segments is really interesting. There was most gender diversity in the angel investment community, but there are still more leaders called John than there are female leaders. There are 7% of the sample called John and 5% are just female. And all segments had very few people of colour. So if you go on to the next slide, Lucy, please. So this is the breakdown for gender, and you can just see the difference between the top 50, the family businesses investment and angel investment, and then the comparison to the 2020 sample. We found in the top 50 businesses, 1 in 4 people had held, 1 in 4 of the leaders had held positions in 4 service companies, so Accenture, EY, McKinsey or PwC, and 41% had had a career in finance before becoming a top leader. In the wider sample, 2 out of 3 investment company leaders attended an elite university, with 1 in 5 of those attending Oxford and Cambridge. And this compares to angel investments leaders, where we saw a little bit more diversity, where 49% of angel investment leaders attended an elite university. 9% of the investment company leaders were female, compared to 20% of angel investment leaders. But even in angel investors, it's less diversity than the other sectors that we looked at last year. 31% of the top business leaders also hold positions on other boards. So it's showing quite a narrow pool of decision makers had significant influence beyond their own company. So why does this matter? Lucy, could you go on to the next slide, please? So we also looked at age diversity. So it gives you an idea of the difference in the different sectors. We found that on the whole, investment company leaders were slightly older, with some people still born in the 1930s. and then family business leaders and angel investors had a slightly younger a leader group. There is ever-growing evidence that companies with greater diversity are likely to outperform others. So particularly there's more evidence on gender diversity than other forms, but we think the evidence is there and it's strong that the diversity of thought in organisations matters at all levels, and that including the top level. I'm sure I don't need to go into the dangers of groupthink with our audience today, but we must remember diversity of thought increases resilience of organisations, and particularly their ability to adapt to new risks and new opportunities. Now, we've all seen through COVID the having to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. And if you've got groupthink in your organisation, you might not consider all the variables on the table. The lack of diversity in investment companies may be influencing investment decisions, and that's a really critical thing if we're going to think about opportunities ahead in Scotland. In the UK, less than 1% of venture capital funding goes to all female teams, so that equates to just 4% of the deals. And this is despite the data showing that female entrepreneurs bring in 20% more revenue with 50% less money. And then we've also got the UK Government Rose Review in 2019 stating that up to 250 billion new value could be added to the UK economy if women's businesses were invested in at the same rate as men's. So when you look at the data, what we found was actually it wasn't changing. And in some sectors it was. So we began to think about, well, there have been lots of initiatives across government. There have been lots of frameworks. There have been all sorts of action plans and codes and charters. But actually, we began thinking about how much can government actually do? And they can encourage and they can guide, they can set a sense of direction. But really, this is up to every leader, which is why we're so keen to talk to the IOD today, because it's every leader can challenge themselves with basic questions on their assumptions and choices, and particularly leaders involved in recruitment, whether it's their own organisation or an organisation that they're on the board for. So find out how people from different backgrounds experience their organisations, and then act if there's something in there that needs to change. Find out how their own organisation is measuring progress, if it is measuring progress. And really what we need is every leader in Scotland to be championing diversity and proactively using opportunities to ensure faster progress. Because what we found when we compared two examples year on year is pretty much we were getting like for like replacement on leaders that had changed. So we know that more equal societies have higher productivity. And if there's higher productivity, that allows even more investment to create more equal societies. So we really do know that in Scotland, we've been talking about productivity for a long time, but what we haven't done is enough on diversity of thought. So what do we need to do next? It really is up to all of us to quote someone who I thought was very famous, and I found out today he didn't say it. Lucy, if you can go on to my final slide. We really need to challenge all ourselves and our colleagues to be the change we want to see in the world. Now, when I found out that I was about to quote this as Gandhi, and I thought, oh, I better double check who actually said this quote, I found out it's been paraphrased. And that, for me, putting words in someone else's mouth, yes, it comes across really simply, but it was kind of ironic that it isn't actually what Gandhi said himself. So I've put the real full phrase down underneath so everyone can see that too. Another quote that I really like that inspires me along the way is from John Carnachan, but it's not actually John Carnachan's phrase either. It's Arthur Ashe, and it's start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And I think those two quotes together really say that we've got to roll up our sleeves and we've got to get on and make faster progress, because the diversity isn't going to come, and we're not going to get all the benefits of having diversity unless we do something about it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Susan. Really great sort of entry into the kind of conversation today, and so much in that research as well. People haven't really dug into the report then. I'd really recommend that they do so. Okay, so that's us kind of starting to look at this issue in the round. Enoch, I'm going to come to you now. Reflections to that research and your thoughts from Black Professionals Scotland.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Louise, and thanks, Suzanne, for sharing those statistics. So first of all, yeah, that's not surprising. We all know that is the current state of play in the country and indeed across the world. And that statistics is very the gender split, male female, and already you can see that female are doing way more poorly compared to male. However, if you then even slice that further and you take you break it down into ethnicity, it gets worse from there. It doesn't get any better. And especially, if you now, start looking at intersection of, female, a Black female or an Asian female, it's downhill from there. So those statistics are not surprising. And that is, part of the reason why we are doing what we're doing at our organization, Black Professionals Scotland, because if organizations continue to act the way they act, if they continue doing what they do, then there'll be no change. And that is what we've been trying to preach around. There needs to be an intentional effort by organizations. I think because some of the conversations I've been involved in, a lot of conversations around diversity and whatnot, and some of the pushbacks are usually we're not doing anything wrong. Our systems are fair, our procedures are fair. However, the people saying this, if you then look at the outcome of their fair procedure or their so-called fair procedure, you see that the outcome doesn't depict something that is fair, because the outcome is favoring white people, is favoring men. So most usually white male. So it's then organizations then looking at that and accepting that there's something wrong in their current procedure. And I think this is where this whole talk around institutional discrimination, not to use racism, institutional discrimination. So systems that are in place that affect a certain group of people, say female or certain ethnicity or certain people from certain background, so lower income background. And it's for organizations to intentionally look at that process, look at that data. Data is really powerful, because sometimes you as an individual can think, what, I'm a good person. I'm not discriminatory. I don't have anything against women. I don't have anything against people of different color. And all the people I work with, I think they are the same. However, if you look at the data, data doesn't lie. If the data is telling you something different, then ultimately organizations then need to accept that there's something wrong with the current state of play. And it's then figuring out what the problem is. Is the problem the fact that we're not getting enough women into certain positions, or we're not getting enough people from different background in certain positions? And then putting a process in play to begin to fix that problem. But the first thing is accepting there's a problem. And if organizations are not accepting that problem, then I think we will be having this conversation, Suzanne, in another 10 years, because it's just going to stay the way it is.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for that, Enoch. And again, points to pick up as the conversation goes on around the importance of kind of intersectionality and that kind of approach around that, thinking about things at that systems level and kind of systems thinking, and absolutely around the kind of the use of data as well. So thank you for that as well. And just to encourage participants as well, please do, if you've got any questions or comments, I can see some already coming into the chat function there, but please do post your comments and questions in there. And I'm now going to come on to Aidan O'Carroll. And Aidan, your kind of thoughts and reflections on that. Was any of this a surprise to you, Aidan?
Not a surprise, Louise, because like everything else, you can see a level I will describe as disappointing progress that has been made. And in reflection, when you think about the Equalities Act having been introduced in 2010 and measure our progress against that, both in terms of the diversity and inclusivity on boards today. My reflection is that the public sector has probably made more progress than the private sector in Scotland. And I think that's been done, and you're just mentioning it in terms of things like mainstream equalities reporting, really looking at the public sector equality duty, using the ethical commissioner when it comes to the recruitment onto boards and equivalent, and also being very committed on things like gender pay gap reporting as well. And when you compare that with what's happening in the private sector, where really looking at the kind of ESG reporting and the diversity and inclusivity side of that is very much still a minority sport. And while it may be a duty and obligation for the largest companies around the world, it still hasn't filtered down into what I would describe as the mindset shift that you would hope to see in order to really take advantage of what this research is showing, that those companies that do have a much more diverse board, that have a much higher gender representation and ethnic minority representation, etc., are more successful, are more sustainable, are driving faster at a time when, particularly in the private sector in Scotland, we're going to have to be more agile. We're going to have to be able to address change in a way that companies and unregistered businesses have not been able to in the past. And unless we tap into the full potential, not just from, I'll call it all aspects of diversity and inclusivity, then we're going to miss the targets that the Scottish Government is wanting to set out, both in terms of economic transformation. So when I look at the statistics, it's not just about, are we actually stuck? We are making progress, but the progress is far too slow. When I think about the family companies that I'm involved in, both previously as an advisor, but now as a non-exec, while there is representation on the boards are generally like me. They are male and white. And so trying to drive that message that things have to change, and that's both at a family and private company. When you look at some of the investment institutions around Scotland, and the statistics are there in the stuff that Susan shared, we still haven't turned the dial, really. And so this piece is, what is it going to take to really change that mindset and that mind shift into empowering this community that is actually there waiting to be recognized and waiting to be given the opportunity. And so there's something here about I think three things that boards can do. First of all, the tone needs to start from the top. It needs to start at chair, chief executive, taking this seriously and really looking at this as an opportunity for the business, not something that is a tick box exercise, a compliance exercise, a reporting exercise. No. They then need to engage the right leaders across the business organization, people who really are committed to this and committed to being held accountable and responsible for making the change. And to do that, I think every business, regardless of size, has to start to create that inspiring story. We need to be able to articulate why it makes a difference to business, to actually really encourage that level of diversity in action and inclusivity in action rather than talking about it. Now, I know we at the IOD were seen, even just a couple of years ago, as being a non-diverse membership organization. And if I would just say, if you do get the chance, have a look at our latest annual report and ask yourself then, is this an organization that's on a journey of improvement? And it is a journey of improvement at IOD. And I talk for all at IOD, the commitment that we've made to really change the dial once and for all. So the journey has not just started, but the journey is accelerating and there's no way back. It's positive movement forward. And if we have that mindset, then I think private sector can really embrace the statistics that are in here and say, this is simply not good enough.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much, Aidan. And And actually on that, again, lots in there around leadership, around accountability, and scrutiny as well, which was also ties to that data issue and the systems issue. And just on that acceleration point that you can articulate really well there, Aidan, Enoch, can I come back to you just on that question? I mean, what are your thoughts about what we need to do to actually very practically accelerate action on this? What would be top of your list in terms of how we accelerate action in this area, particularly in the kind of finance and investment sectors?
Yeah, very controversial idea, but I think one of the reasons why we've seen a lot of improvements, still not enough as we'd like to see, but we've seen some very good improvements in the in gender diversity space, is because governments got involved, and governments then start putting pressure on private organizations or the PLCs and non-governmental organizations to do more around, maybe not targets, but expectation of what percentage of diversity they want on their board, women and whatnot. So I'll put it this way: if the government didn't put that in place, the level of progress we've seen, we wouldn't have seen that progress. And the women that are now in these positions, they probably wouldn't have been there. And this is not because they were not good, it's just because organizations didn't take the step to give these women the opportunity they need. So there are a lot of people out there, still women, ethnic minority people from lower social class, disabled people, and various people from different diversity spectrum, if you want to put it that way, who are not getting the opportunity. And it's because organizations are not giving them the opportunity. And the reason for that, in my view, is because organizations don't have a reason to do that. I'm an accountant, so I always look at things from point of view of profit and loss. A lot of these organizations are profit-oriented, and it's when you start putting pressure on them in such a way, especially the senior management, to say, if you don't do this, there are consequences to your share price, there are consequences to the bonus you take home at the end of the year, then organizations will start making changes. It's that simple. We can try and preach to their emotional state, or their, try to touch, reach them on a human level. But ultimately, for a CEO, for example, right now, if you are trying to convince the CEO to, drive the change within the organization, and you could even show them data around how more diverse organizations are doing better and whatnot, as far as they are concerned, it still does not affect their bonus and their share price. However, if you start putting things in place such that our CEO's bonus is going to go from 5 million to 1 million, I can bet they will start making changes. They'll start putting things in place, because then they take that as a personal project. They don't want the company share price to go down. They don't want their bonus to be affected. And they'll start putting things in place. And this is not to say they will be favoring diverse talents unfairly. No, they will just be giving them the opportunity they should have given them anyway, but they were not giving it to them just because of the systems in place. I'll give you an example of, from the sort of the Black community. So in Scotland, a lot of the Black people you come across in Scotland are first-generation immigrants like myself. They will have an accent. They will not have a Scottish accent. So they're still sort of settling into Scotland. One of the challenges these people face when they arrive in Scotland is this thing around you don't have UK experience. And that affects a lot of people within the Black community, because it's a very racist line to use to sort of eliminate people from African and Asian countries coming into the UK, because those coming from America and Canada and Australia and other white countries don't get that challenge of you don't have UK experience. There's this general perception that these people are good because they are coming from Canada and America because they're white. But however, if you're coming from, for example, Ghana, you are automatically seen as inferior. And even these recruiters and these people within HR that are putting these sort of barriers in place probably don't even know they're doing it from a racial perspective. They probably don't know. They probably never thought about it. it's just a line that's been used to sort of put a barrier to stop a lot of Black people sort of kicking off their career. However, you know, if I share this story with a CEO, he'll probably think, oh, that's terrible. Okay, nice, move on. But if you tell that CEO that your bonus is going to be affected, however, this is something that is happening in your organization, surely it's going to make sure there's a change such that the HR process is in place, not to, you know, negatively discriminate these people. Because sorry, using an accounting perspective, I mean, example as well. With as an accountant, if you're an accountant from, say, Ghana, and you're an accountant from, say, America, the accounting regulation in America is different from the accounting regulation in the UK. The accounting regulation in the UK is actually the same as the accounting regulation in Ghana. However, if a qualified accountant comes from Ghana today and a qualified accountant comes from America today, the American guy will probably get a job tomorrow, and the Ghanaian guy will likely be washing dishes for a year at least before he gets a break at all. So that's just an example of one of the barriers that are in place. And I think the way we can really fix this problem, I feel like I've been in these kind of conversations too many times, and I don't see a lot of things changing. And I think the only way change can happen is if you start hitting people in the pocket.
Okay. And I suppose that then brings us into the kind of the role around ESG measures and those kind of things as well that Aidan kind of mentioned. Absolutely. And Susan, I'm going to come to you to give you a chance to kind of reflect on that. But if I may also, we have had a question that's specifically for you, Susan. So if I could maybe use this as an opportunity to merge into the questions. It's from an anonymous attendee, so I'm going to have to ask it. So whoever that was. So yeah, Susan, your thoughts just around actions to accelerate, but someone is asking, within the business figures on the chart, did DHI do breakdown by standard industrial occupational sectors? And if so, do any particular sectors show improvement compared to others, although recognising everybody kind of needs to move the dial? So maybe if you could have a go at that as well as about on the acceleration piece, Susan. Thanks.
Yeah, so to take the question first, we haven't done a breakdown by sectors, mainly because the sample isn't big enough. I think, you know, what we try and do is look at trends in the data rather than singling out or identifying individual businesses, because I'm not sure that naming and shaming works. And actually, by looking at the trends in the data, we're seeing patterns that we need to talk about, I think, and we need to challenge people to do more. But actually naming or shaming, I'm not sure is a great way forward. So we haven't, but we could, if there was demand, do a bigger sample. I mean, that would be the next thing, to look at something bigger. The actual sector we're looking at the moment is the top 300 charities, because we haven't looked at them in the same way. And there's a lot of crossover between people on boards in one sector and another sector. And we think that looking at the top 300 charities, so that data will be coming out early in the new year. And then what we'll do is review all the research we've done over the last 18 months and look at where do we go next. You know, do we repeat the whole big sample again, or do we go into individual sectors? So whoever the anonymous attendee is, do get in touch and tell me if you think we should break down by sector, because I'd love to have that more conversation on that. One of the things we've not talked about too much is the opportunity cost. And Enoch mentioned government encouraging and incentivizing and that, but actually how many audit and risk committees consider the opportunity cost of not having the correct kind of policies in their recruitment, and how many boards are challenging through their audit and risk committees? And so that would be I know we're a bit in that accountancy space today, but I can see Charlotte Barber's in the audience, so I'm interested to see if she's got any views on that, because Charlotte is from ICAS, and I think Enoch is right. Accountants have a lot of power. You know, when you look at who the leaders are in the top 50 businesses, you know, 41% of them come from a financial background, you know, whether or not they're qualified accountants. But actually, you know, the people that have got a grasp of the money, as soon as they realize there's a cost to not having diversity of thought in their organization, the change will happen faster. So we need to start talking about that cost of inaction. And I think that's the only way we're going to get progress, because actually, government has been on this for more than 10 years now. I think that's why we've got such a strong angel investment community in Scotland now, because it's been part of consistent policy over years. And we've got some really, really active females. And in London particularly, there's much more targeted investment in Black and minority investment. But we shouldn't have to have separate funds. Why can't our mainstream investment companies consider all investments equally? And until they do, yes, we'll have to have targeted funds. But really, come on, it's 2021. Get with the program.
Interesting. Okay, next question that's kind of coming in, and just encouraging people as we're warming up into this discussion, please do use the Q&A function to log your question. Again, we've got another anonymous attendee asking this question. So Aidan, I'll maybe come to you with this one. They're asking, to start us off anyway, so should enterprise agencies, so Scottish Enterprise, HI and SOSI, begin only to invest in companies which have stated and measurable strategies to improve on agreed timescale and timetables around diversity and so on? So your thought, essentially, this is a conditionality question, isn't it? What's your thoughts on that?
It's a great question, first of all, because at the end of the day, it can't just be about the enterprise agencies. It is, again, as part and parcel of investing in future businesses and business opportunities, what are the lenses that the investors need to be looking through? And so whether that's a public agency, whether it's a private equity, whether it is some other form of funder, angel investor, etc. And I think the interesting issue here is not just in terms of how do we make sure that the D&I agenda is a measurable agenda, such that it's there, that the question is asked, what is your strategy? What are the measurements you're taking? And where's your starting point, and where do you need to get to over the next 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? These are standard questions that are now being asked around sustainability, around the road to net zero. And of course, that's getting a huge amount of attention at the moment. And what I don't want to happen is that suddenly becomes the only conversation that's happening at board, because the D&I journey is absolutely essential that we make progress here if we're going to get a sustainable business model, if we're going to really hit all of those targets. So I think, in essence, we need to move the ESG kind of reporting that's sitting up there at the elite, as I call it, the minority sport at the moment in terms of the largest companies, and start to get that more mainstream. And the way in which that can happen is definitely for the investment agencies, including Scottish Enterprise and other public agencies, to start to ask the questions and to start to say, what is the strategy? And I just give you another example, Louise, and it is a public sector example, but in Revenue Scotland, we have a Staff and Equalities Committee alongside the Audit and Risk Committee. And at the end of the day, the Staff and Equalities Committee is there to hold us to account, the board to account, in terms of the progress that we're making to make sure that equalities are happening in fact, as opposed to simply being talked about. And so we do and measure our progress every year across a number of KPIs. Now, I've heard before that KPIs on diversity and inclusivity can be challenging. So what is my answer to that? Because you can come up with the right KPIs for your organization where you can actually measure positive progress. And that's for every business. Every size of business should now start to think about, this is an opportunity. It's not an opportunity cost. It's an opportunity to grow my business, to grow our business in a sustainable way. Therefore, what are the KPIs we need to set down alongside, to Enoch's point, the financial penalties for not doing so, i.e. my bonus, and I agree with that, the bonus should not be simply, I hit my P&L number. It has to be a whole number of other KPIs that the chief executive and the board are accountable for. And I think that's the inevitable direction that we're taking. And my view is that we should be accelerating towards that not doing that in sort of, I'll call it dribs and drabs at the moment. So something that becomes more endemic in the organization is going to make a difference, because if you don't measure it, it ain't going to happen. And we have to start to really get those measurements in place.
Thanks for that, Aidan. I think that point about the interconnectedness, though, to the sustainability piece and net zero is actually important, because actually diversity and net zero are really, really closely linked. Enoch, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I was going to add to what Aidan said, which is very good points. So I was at an event last week organized by the Scottish Council for Development and Initiative, and again the event was around where Scotland going in the next 10 years, making a good living, and there was some very strong panel discussions, and one of it was with, the event was very geared. I mean, it was supposed to be generic, but again, because that was on the back of COP26, there was a lot of conversations around sustainability, net zero, and all that. So there was a panel event with some senior executive from Shell and someone from sustainability from Aberdeen Asset Management. And what the lady from Aberdeen said was, as investors, what they are now beginning to do more of is around putting pressure on companies like Shell, because they represent the people, they represent us, our pension money, our pension funds, our savings, all that is with these investors. So really, they've got a lot of part to play with regards to getting us to where we need to get. I, as an individual, cannot put that much pressure on Shell. However, a company like Aberdeen, who's got billions invested in Shell, billions of our money, my money, Susan's money, can then go on our behalf to start asking Shell, what are you doing to get us to net zero? And that convention can then also extend to diversity. What are you doing in the space of diversity? Because if you don't, it's carrots and sticks, we can pull our money. I mean, they probably won't do that, but there's that consequences to it. So again, moving away from penalizing CEOs, it's around these. And we were talking about enterprise organizations like Scottish Enterprise. I don't know much about them and what influence they have, but again, if they have influence working with these organizations, they can use their influence as well to start driving that conversation and ultimately holding them accountable and letting them know that the state of play has essentially changed. The conversations we'll be having, what's important to us as an organization has now changed. It's no longer about profitability and that, but it's about sustainability, our economy, purpose as an organization. Why are you? What's the purpose for existence? It shouldn't just be about profits anymore. It should be about the people, the world. I don't want to get into too much social chat now, so I'll stop there.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Got another couple of kind of questions, so I'm just going to move us on just to make sure that we do that. Lorraine Simpson, you put a question into the chat. Can you unmute yourself, Lorraine? So you want to ask a question yourself?
Hi there, thanks very much. This is my first event with the Institute of Directors. I just joined recently and it's made a very good impression. It's really, really useful to kind of hear these perspectives and get access to these minds. So my question is, I really enjoyed all the presentations. I thought the data that Susan presented was fascinating, and I've read that piece of research. I thought that the exploration of socioeconomic diversity was fascinating and not something that I'd seen elsewhere. But I wondered, I'm in Edinburgh, and I was really struck when I first moved to Edinburgh from London when I started to find out about the stats around the number of children who go to private school in Edinburgh. And I wondered if this is a particular challenge for the business and leadership culture in the city. If there's high numbers of children in private education, what does that mean for socio-economic diversity in leadership?
Okay, great question. Thank you so much, Lorraine. Susan, do you want to offer your thoughts on that, seeing as how your research, what's your thinking?
An uncontroversial question, Lorraine. It is a tricky thing, and as someone that's also moved to Edinburgh and has children in Edinburgh, it blows my mind on the numbers. However, I'm also lucky in that I get to talk to a lot of people, and I think there are some industries that you kind of find out the more you get into Edinburgh professional audiences that that it seems the norm that there are certain schools you go to, and you just kind of, if you're not from Edinburgh, you kind of are like, really, is that how it works? And so I've talked to some different parents, and one recently was really interesting, and I've kind of asked her if she'd write a blog, but she's too scared. And originally she'd moved here from a different country, worked in a place where everyone sent their children to private school, and so she did that, and then she didn't really like what she was experiencing, and she also realized she wasn't part of the community in which she lived. And she saw other children playing at the park, knowing each other, and she realized that her child was missing out. And so she actually took her child out of the school they were in and moved it to the local school. And she said it's the best thing she has ever done. And yet she was sold the idea that she was letting her child down by doing the opposite. So that idea that what is best and what you experience, and actually there's a whole load of things that we don't talk about in Edinburgh, about the value of the community of place, and how you get to understand other people around about you when they might not be like you, and that kind of idea was coming through from those conversations. So I don't have any definite answer for Edinburgh, but I think the onus is on individuals to think about how they take this forward, and for particular industries that might have a pattern of recruiting from certain schools or certain pathways or certain families, we need to think about that. You know, is that organisation getting the best talent out there? You know, is it a meritocracy if that route is a pathway that's much easier for some than others?
Thank you. Thanks, Susan. Really interesting. We've got another couple of questions. I'm aware we're going to finish on time to respect everybody's time, so I'm just going to move us on. We've got a comment in AP. So AP, do you want to unmute yourself? And then I'm going to come to you, Sarah. So AP.
Yes, good afternoon. It's Anne Packard.
Hi,
my
Anne.
question is, yes, and mine were the early ones actually. Should diversity impact strategies and timetable statements become obligatory in annual reports like other impact and other obligatory statements? Because that would absolutely be a requirement, and it would be there both for potential shareholders and existing shareholders.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Aidan or Enoch, either of you want to take that?
Anne, great to hear from you. And I actually agree. So I'll give a personal opinion. I don't know what IOD's stated position is, but absolutely we should be encouraging the mandatory reporting, moving towards mandatory reporting. I grew up in a world as an accountant in a Big Four firm where we got used to regulatory and mandatory intervention, whether it was globally through Sarbanes-Oxley on reporting, and it changed the behavior. We might not have liked it because it made things more onerous, but it changed the behavior. And ultimately, this balancing of stick and carrot is always a sensitive issue. But I think there's an inevitability that if we really are to make a step change here, we have to exhort as much as we can to get that change of behavior. But inevitably, things like the Equalities Act 2010 and beyond, in terms of the mandatory nature of 50-50 from a Scottish public sector in terms of board should be 50-50 gender balanced, makes not just makes you think, but actually makes you act in a particular way. So I'm actually on the balance of this, I see a role for making things mandatory, not all mandatory, because you could overwhelm a business from that perspective, but what are the key things that we want to be able to measure so that we can see the positive impact that is making going forward. So I would agree with you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to bring you in now, Sarah, but Enoch, maybe if you'll think about answering Sarah's question first. So Sarah Robertson, do you want to unmute yourself, Sarah, and ask? I know you've got a couple of kind of questions in the chat there, so if you want to go ahead.
Yeah. So I just think it's interesting because day-to-day interactions, and I guess a couple of stories to illustrate the question quickly. I think if you put requirements and measurements in, without addressing the underlying issue, which is the only reason humans aren't nice to each other is because we see other people as somehow different and not the same as us. And actually the conversation we've just had about private schools is an example of it. My private school experience exposed me to different religions, different cultures, made me a more diverse person, versus the northeast of Scotland, my state school experience, I'd never met a non-Church of Scotland, non-white person. So I think we need to be careful not to make assumptions and take things at face value, and that's how we avoid discrimination. And so I worry when we talk about measurements, because I had a conversation with somebody who's a really nice person, was upset that a woman got a job and was blaming it on ratios. And I said, well, was she qualified for the job? He said, no. And I said, so the thing you're upset about is that she's not qualified for the job. You're not upset that she's a woman in the job. So I think that that's where my question is coming from, is that if we just put measurements in, we risk losing the actual challenge that we're trying to fix. And so thoughts on what you can measure other than the outcomes to try and make progress, bringing people with us rather than alienating them.
Yeah, no, it's really, thank you for that. That's great. So, and I suppose also we've had a kind of question as well where someone's, again, it's someone anonymous, but sort of saying, is this about, is changing behaviour enough, or actually is it about wider kind of culture? And I suppose that speaks to your point as well, Sarah. But Enoch, your thoughts in response to Sarah?
Sarah, yeah, that's a good question. So my view as a Black person is 40 years ago, I don't know when the racial, when it became officially a crime to commit a racial crime. I don't know what year it was, but there was a time, a point in time when the UK government made it a crime to commit a racial crime, or to commit a racist act against someone else. At this point in the UK's history, a lot of people were still racist, and the government would have gone down the path of, let's try and reach into people's hearts, let's get them to love one another, which would have been good. However, by making it a crime, that essentially, ultimately, over time, changed people's hearts. And that's not to say that's the best approach, or the more human approach, but sometimes you just need to get things done. And that is why I'm benefiting from such a law, because then I can live freely and confidently as any other person in the country, and not have the fear of being racially abused physically or verbally while I go about my daily business. So going back to your question around, should we maybe do more to resolve the underlying issue of why there is racism, or why there is discrimination in the first place? Yeah, that's a good approach, but that will take us longer than if we just put systems in place to make sure people don't do it. So as Aidan said, being an accountant as well, I think laws changes behavior, and maybe we can decide not to use the law and just try and reach into to people's good hearts for them to change. However, in my view, my opinion, and this is my opinion, and that will probably take a longer time on the journey to equality than just putting a system in place to say, right, you need to, in this case, you need to disclose where you are on your journey and whatnot. And what that would then ultimately do is, ultimately, nobody wants to look bad. So that begins to change behavior, maybe selfishly or not selfishly, but eventually, over time, that will become the norm. That will become how you act. Kids growing up now are growing up knowing that you can't go around being racist towards people. That's not what you do. And the reason why they've grown up that way is because of the law the UK government put in place 30 years ago, which ultimately changed their parents' behavior, and then ultimately, filter down to the next generation. So Sarah, hopefully that answers the question to an extent, but I believe definitely regulations is the quicker way to go, and the human behavior will follow right after.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Enoch. And actually, Sarah, I just see you've done that comment, which was kind of perhaps what I was going to kind of reflect on is, again, it's this interconnectedness and about the interplay between behaviour and culture, but also then regulation, legislation, systems. So it's the whole thing, isn't it, really? It's that kind of interplay between them all. We're now kind of just about 4 minutes away from our kind of close this afternoon, and it's been so rich already, and one of the, as ever, a sign of a great conversation. We could easily go on a lot longer, but I would say this is what I hope is the beginning of a very, very fruitful partnership between the organisations here today. So hopefully more opportunities to explore these in more detail. So please do kind of keep in contact with us all about kind of future events and so on, and subscribe or sign up to mailing lists and so on, so if you want to kind of keep involved. But again, I'm going to be aware of time, so I'm going to be quite strict on a kind of 30-second thing here. But for each of our panelists, just give me your kind of final thoughts. Give me one takeaway from this discussion this afternoon that you would want people to leave with. What would you want people to be leaving this discussion and thinking about? So Aidan, I'll come to you first.
This is a positive journey, and embrace it, create the story for your organization, and be that force, not just for good, but to improve your organization and improve its sustainability. It's a positive message, not a negative one.
Great, thank you, Aidan. And Enoch, your one takeaway you'd want people to think about from today?
I think sometimes when we have these conversations, I think there's been about 25 people on the call today. People listen to this and think someone else is going to fix it. My HR team is going to fix it. My D&I team is going to fix it. My takeaway is, don't ask what is someone else doing. Ask yourself, what am I doing? I know it's cliche to say let the change start with you, but what can you do within your own sphere of influence to start driving change? And don't worry about what everyone else is doing. Focus on your actions, and let's see where the world goes from there. Yeah, absolutely. And I can guarantee everyone on this call has power and influence in a whole range of different spheres. So huge opportunities for them to kind of create change. Thank you, Enoch. And Susan, your kind of takeaway.
Can I just say what Enoch said? Because I think that was great. But I'll also add to that. I think data tells a story, and we've got a big bit of data here that's worth telling a story. What we found so far is that we've got many more women downloading and sharing it than we have men. And this isn't a female issue. It's not a Black issue. It's not anyone's issue. It's everybody's issue. And so if everyone on this call can take this report and share it with one person that they think might not read it and talk to them about it, that would be an amazing action and the start of a new conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And Charlotte as well, Charlotte Barbara, thank you for your comment as well that you made about the discussion itself and the importance of keeping this topic at the forefront of public discourse. So absolutely, reinforcing Susan's point there to share this report as well. So so if you haven't read it yet, please do. Please reflect on it. Please do share it and make sure that we're giving that much more oxygen. It's unfortunately time to draw this event to a close. So huge thanks to our speakers and especially to you, our audience today, for giving up what is essentially, I know, your lunchtime. So I hope you were managing to eat your sandwich while you were listening in. The recording will be available afterwards on the DHI website. So do watch out again for that. We'll also share it on social media and across our channels. And thank you to every single one of you for joining us today. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you think there's more topics and more things that we can talk about, then please do get in touch with us, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon.